Hi Knights, this month we are recognizing Black History Month with the rest of the country, and some other teachers and I will be showing you videos once a week where we will highlight people and stories that we just find really interesting and really important for us to know about and to talk about. And I'm going to start this series with the poem The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. You may have watched this in class or heard about it on the news. Amanda Gorman was the country's first youth poet laureate when she was, I believe, 16 years old, and she's 22 years old now, and she read this poem 2 weeks ago at the inauguration. So we're going to watch little clips of her reciting her poem, and then I'm going to jump in at certain points to kind of explain some of the text features and explain why this poem is such an interesting poem in the way that it sounds. A lot of poetry really plays on our interest in the sounds of the words or the way the words sound with other words. And so I'm going to kind of highlight some of the choices that she made in her art so that we can understand why it sounds so interesting. So I hope that that's informative, and I hope you enjoy the poem itself. Here we go.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade.
Now, Gorman, her poem is actually a very contemporary, modern poem, but what's interesting about it is the way it starts. And you'll see I've written rhyme here on the slide, and this poem just starts out with a very traditional rhyme scheme. So it's very normal for a poet to have 2 lines out of 4 rhyme, and for those lines not to be next to each other. So when you see how these lines end, ourselves, shade, carry, wade, shade and wade rhyme, and it's very, very normal and traditional to kind of skip a line, and also it's very normal and traditional to have that rhyme come at the end of the line. So what's going to be really interesting is to see how that changes as we go along in the poem and what she does that's different, that maybe is a little bit more surprising and kind of hits you with a little bit of a punch and really brings attention to her words.
We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is.
Already here, Gorman is starting to play with some more interesting kind of sound features that are less traditional. So what you can see there in orange is called the slant rhyme. Sometimes it's called a half rhyme. Beast and peace, they sound really close, but they're not quite a rhyme because of the T. And that really usually makes us feel kind of unsettled to have that slant rhyme. And if you look at what the words say there, we've learned that quiet isn't always peace. The words also make us unsettled too, like there's not peace. And then also one of my favorite lines down here is a pun. Puns just play on a double sound or a double meaning. And because these lines end with such a similar sound, they're a pun. So where it says, of what just isn't always justice. And I just think that's probably her strongest line. It's just really cool sound.
And yet the dawn is hours before we knew it. Somehow we do it.
And here, this is another rhyme. It's just a straight rhyme, but the way it is with the emphasis, it's called a feminine rhyme. And these are usually more uplifting, kind of fun or exciting sounds. So it says, and yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. And so there's giving us a lot of confidence in these lines. And because the stress is on knew and do and not on it at the end, that's called a feminine rhyme because it's actually 2 syllables at the end that rhymes, and the last syllable is not emphasized.
Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect.
Now, I know some of you are fans of the musical Hamilton, and in Hamilton there's a lot of internal rhyme. It's actually a very common feature of hip hop or rap music. And what an internal rhyme is just like the word mean there. It's inside of a line. It's not at the end of the line, but it rhymes with some other word. And again, in the beginning, I told you about that traditional rhyme, but this is Gorman really kind of giving us something new and something fresh, something unexpected. And I think that's really what stands out about this poem is it just sounds very surprising and confident, and it's really pretty cool.
We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man.
Alliteration is just the repeated beginning sound of words. So you can see in blue all of those C's, that bluish greenish color for all of the C words here. And this part is really just kind of interesting because it just repeats that sound over and over again. And not only does that kind of quicken the rhythm, but it also just makes us think about all the different types of people there are and all the different situations. And that's kind of what this poem is about all of those people kind of working together even though they're different, and our country being made of all different kinds of people. So it's a really kind of uplifting and inspiring line here.
And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside.
Again, this is the Hamilton and hip hop internal rhyme, and it's really kind of shocking to have that divide sound come up again in the word aside. And it's really kind of a surprising repetition of the sound, which makes it really, really interesting.
We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another.
I told you before that a pun can be a double meaning or a double sound, and the earlier one was a double sound. This is a double meaning. So here the first arms is really to mean weapons, and then the other arms is really just our body's arms.
We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew. That even as we hurt, we hoped. That even as we tired, we tried. That we'll forever be tied together, victorious.
So here we've got, again, alliteration and internal rhyme. The alliteration is really interesting here, especially with those pairs in the middle, where you have a negative word like grieved and then a positive word like grew, which she repeats then for the two lines after that. And then again, the Hamilton hip hop internal rhyme.
Not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division.
This is probably my second favorite line in the whole poem. So it has this internal rhyme with the no and the so, but it almost looks like if you remember that feminine rhyme that we looked at in the beginning, because it goes no de and so de, but it goes no defeat and so division. But just that that interesting kind of contrast that comes from knowing defeat, but never again sowing division. So what will never do, the contrast of what has happened, and then also the kind of expectation in your mind that no defeat is going to rhyme with so division, but the division and defeat don't rhyme. It's just really kind of striking.
Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it.
Again, Gorman is using a feminine rhyme in a line that's supposed to be very uplifting and inspiring about how we are repairing the things that have been broken in our country. And for that, she uses this rhyme that has a stressed syllable, but then an unstressed syllable after it, and they both rhyme. Harriet, parrot.
We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free.
Okay, this is probably my third favorite line. With the alliteration, all of those B sounds over and over again, it almost seems like the speaker is just kind of marching, and it's a struggle. It's really hard. Back, but, be, bruised, but, benevolent, but, bold. And then you get to the repeated fierce and free, the repeated F sounds. And it's almost like that struggle, that journey has finally been accomplished. And then you're into success with fierce and free, and we get repetition of a new sound.
We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright.
What's really interesting about this line is it starts out with alliteration and kind of a negative connotation. Blunders become their burdens. And then it goes to a slant rhyme and switches to a more positive mood with alliteration again, and then full rhymes or complete rhymes. Might, right, and birthright. And that just makes it seem very kind of solid and substantial, and very much like there is a change that's happened, and this change is secure.
So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West.
The repeated W sounds here just seem like we get kind of swept up in the power of the speaker, and we're along for the ride, and it's a very strong and empowering mood that comes along with it.
We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
And Gorman ends the poem again with rhyme, kind of traditional to have what's called a rhyming couplet, or a pair of two lines that rhyme. and also that feminine rhyme that we've talked about before being kind of uplifting. And this ends in a very hopeful tone and mood, for there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And that rhyme where the stress is on C and B, but then it also rhymes with the next syllable it for both of those lines, really creates this kind of uplifting, strong, powerful mood. Thanks for indulging me and listening to me talk about poetry. It was one of my favorite things to do when I was teaching high school, was teaching poetry and just spending time looking at words and thinking about the sounds and how it all contributes to the meaning. So I hope this was enjoyable and beneficial for you. And I hope the rest of this month too is just informative as we look at Black history and see how it's really such an important part that's often overlooked of our country's history.